RUSI New South Wales is an independent, apolitical, not-for-profit public education institute that, since 1888, has been promoting informed debate on and enhancing public awareness and understanding of defence and national security issues. We are Australia's oldest think tank. We conduct monthly lectures and seminars, issue a monthly newsletter, provide research support through our extensive military and historical library located in the Anzac Memorial in Sydney's Hyde Park, and together with RUSI Australia, publish a national quarterly magazine called United Service, with informed articles addressing the latest defence and security issues.
Please note, this monthly update presents the geostrategic situation as at the 10th of June, 2025. As often with these rapidly changing events, the monthly update can be out of date by the time the podcast is released. Russo-Ukrainian war, no end in sight. In the war on land, Russia continues to hold the upper hand. All along the 1,200 kilometers front line, however, Ukraine has established close drone surveillance to a depth of 15 kilometers, enabling artillery and drone strikes on advancing Russian forces, whether in small groups or larger formations. Russian progress is largely dependent on electronic jamming of the Ukrainian drones. At an operational level, Russia's spring offensive is making slow progress, and both sides are placing increased emphasis on missile and drone attacks on the opponent's cities and strategic infrastructure. Since early May, Russia has substantially increased the tempo of its now daily drone and missile strikes on Ukrainian cities. On the 1st of June, Ukrainian Special Forces launched Operation Spider's Web. In the operation's 18-month preparatory phase, they had infiltrated short-range drones into Russia. On the 1st of June they used these drones to attack 5 strategic military airfields in the Murmansk, Irkutsk, Ivanovo, Ryazani, and Amur regions, the last located some 4,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Ukraine claimed up to 41 nuclear-capable long-range strategic bombers were hit, of which 13 were destroyed and the remainder damaged. If so, this would represent 34% of Russia's air missile carriers, worth about $7 billion and probably irreplaceable in the short to medium term. At the time of writing, initial U.S. assessments indicated 10 Russian bombers had been destroyed and 20 damaged. A rare A-50 surveillance plane was also damaged. Concurrently, Ukrainian Special Forces destroyed 2 Russian railway bridges, one in each of Russia's Bryansk and Kursk oblasts, killing at least 7 people and injuring at least 72 more. Then, for the third time in 3 years, damaged the strategic Kerch Bridge, which links Russia to Crimea and enables a logistics corridor to Ukraine's southern front. In retaliation, Russia has further intensified its nightly drone and missile strikes on Ukrainian cities, especially Kiev, the capital, and Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city, which is near the Russian border. On the 5th of June, Kiev was struck by some 4,000 drones and 40 missiles, 4 people were killed and 20 wounded. In a massive drone, missile and guided bomb attack on Kharkiv on the 7th of June, 4 people were killed and at least 24 wounded. In the ground fighting, Ukraine's 7-month cross-border incursion from its Sumy Oblast into Russia's Kursk Oblast, which began on the 6th of August, 2024 and at its peak had seized over 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory, had ended by the 16th of March, 2025. The last Ukrainian forces withdrew from Kursk Oblast to new defensive positions along the Sumy-Kursk border. These defensive positions included a small foothold within Kursk near the border town of Tetkino. Since then, there's been continuing skirmishing along the border. Ukrainian forces also invaded Belgorod Oblast in March-April and now hold some isolated pockets along the international border, but Ukraine now will be unable to use its occupation of significant Russian territory as a bargaining chip in any peace negotiations. As to the fighting along the 1,000 kilometers front line in eastern and southern Ukraine, by early June, Russia's spring offensive had made some progress. While each side was making marginal tactical gains at various places, overall, the Russians had the better of the fighting and were expanding the amount of territory they control. On the eastern axis, Luhansk Oblast is largely in Russian hands. In Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces have been advancing slowly westwards towards the strategic city of Pokrovsk and to the south of the city towards Donetsk's border with Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. While Russian forces have closed up to Pokrovsk from the south, there is a tactical stalemate around Pokrovsk which is not cut off and remains in Ukrainian hands. Russia claimed on the 8th of June its forces had reached the Dnipropetrovsk border in southern Donetsk. The Russian advance to and beyond Pokrovsk is the most notable change in control of the front line in Donetsk for several months, but analysts say innovative tactics by Ukrainian forces, combining the use of drones and ground forces, have inflicted significant losses on Russian forces and slowed their offensive. On the southern axis, Russian forces have focused largely on maintaining their frontline positions in Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts, with their main offensive operations continuing to be in western Zaporizhia, where they continue to assault using small infantry groups together with motorcycle teams. They employ a wave tactic, sending 4 to 5 motorcycles to find gaps in Ukrainian defenses and then follow up with dismounted infantry to consolidate positions. Russia now holds some 3/4 of Zaporizhia, and Ukrainian military analysts estimate that the Russians have accumulated as many as 70,000 troops along the Zaporizhia front, plus hundreds of tanks and artillery guns. A US-led diplomatic push has resulted in direct negotiations between Russian and Ukrainian officials in Istanbul on 2 occasions, the 16th of May and the 3rd of June. On each occasion, the two sides agreed to swap prisoners of war, but failed to agree to a ceasefire or make any major breakthrough. The two sides remain deeply divided on how to end the war. Many observers consider that Putin is using the negotiations to buy time while he seizes more land to improve his negotiating position. It remains to be seen whether Trump will place pressure on Putin as America's European allies demand he now do. Gaza post-ceasefire, the war resumes. The Israel-Hamas ceasefire agreement, which went into effect on the 19th of January, 2025, was to have been implemented in 3 stages, but when Stage 1 was completed on the 2nd of March, Israel elected not to proceed with Stage 2. Instead, it demanded the immediate release of all remaining hostages. When Hamas refused, Israel ended the temporary ceasefire. It resumed its fierce strikes on believed Hamas targets and reoccupied swathes of Gazan territory. Israel also reimposed the blockade on humanitarian aid entering Gaza. A major reason for Israel doing so was because, despite the decapitation of its leadership and depletion of its fighting capabilities, Hamas remains a formidable political and military force. It is able not only to engage in diplomacy and govern Gaza, but also to conduct guerrilla warfare against the Israeli forces in the enclave and to bring rocket fire to bear on Israel itself. In response, on the 5th of May, the Israeli cabinet approved plans to capture the entire Gaza Strip and to remain in the territory for an unspecified length of time with a view to freeing the remaining hostages and destroying Hamas as a political and military force. To this end, the Israeli army called up tens of thousands of reserve soldiers. Under the plan, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians would be pushed to southern Gaza and Hamas would be prevented from distributing humanitarian aid, as doing so strengthens its rule in Gaza. Since the Stage 1 ceasefire ended, the Israel Defense Forces (IDF) have struck dozens of militant targets daily and have had some notable successes in eliminating more members of the Hamas political and military leadership, including Mohammed Sinwar, a senior Hamas commander and possibly their leader in succession to his late brother, Yahya Sinwar. Mohammed Sinwar was killed in an airstrike on the European hospital in Khan Yunis on the 13th of May. This IDF success, though, has come at a great cost to the Gazan people. Some hundreds more Gazans have been killed, bringing the toll since the conflict began in October 2023 to more than 55,000 killed and 126,000 wounded according to Palestinian health officials. Further, the humanitarian situation, which had improved during the ceasefire, is again dire. The World Food Programme ran out of food stocks following Israel's 11-week blockade. Shortages of water, food, medical supplies and fuel have led to healthcare facing total collapse and to widespread hunger, disease and, increasingly, cases of starvation. Israel faced intense international pressure to end the blockade. On the 18th of May, Israel announced it had commenced extensive new ground operations in Gaza and would allow a basic amount of food into the territory, saying a hunger crisis there would jeopardize its new military offensive. Israel set up a new food distribution system which bypassed the established UN humanitarian aid distribution system. The new system employed a newly formed US-approved private aid agency, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation (GHF), to distribute 8 packs at new distribution centers in zones to which the Israeli Defense Forces (IDF) were to provide security and control access. The first of the new aid distribution sites were in operation in southern Gaza near Rafah by early June. In practice, though, the new aid distribution system proved problematic. Chaos ensued initially when masses of starving civilians tried to gain access to the GHF centers, especially when the IDF fired warning shots towards the crowd. Hundreds of Palestinian civilians were wounded or killed while queuing for aid on several occasions. As recently as the 9th of June, 12 civilians in an aid queue were reported killed. Further, when the IDF needed to conduct operations in areas through which the access routes passed, the GDF distribution centers had to be closed temporarily. By the 8th of June, the GDF had established 3 distribution centers and it supplemented this distribution system by providing food boxes to Gaza merchants for on-distribution to citizens. It claimed a total of 1,157,760 meals were distributed on the 8th of June. Meanwhile, peace negotiations are making no progress. International negotiators report that neither side is showing any flexibility. Israel says it will not agree to end the war until Hamas is defeated. Hamas demands an agreement that winds down the war. Indeed, the US seems to have lost interest in the Israel-Hamas negotiations. Without involving Israel, the Trump administration negotiated directly with Hamas and achieved the release of the one remaining hostage with US nationality in Gaza on the 11th of May. Trump then visited the Middle East from 13 to 16 May, bypassed Israel and held seemingly successful trade talks with Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Commentators concluded that the Trump administration no longer supports the hardline Israeli negotiating position. The Congo, the M23 insurgency consolidates gains in Kivu then enter a truce. For the past 30 or so years, there has been an on-and-off conflict in the Kivu region of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. This region shares a border with Rwanda and Burundi. The conflict involves ethnic tensions between Hutus, supported by Burundi, and Tutsis, supported by Rwanda, conflated with conflicts over mineral wealth, among other things. Tutsis, who were the target of the Rwandan genocide in 1994, are an ethnic minority in the Congo, but have a notable presence in the Kivu region. North Kivu and South Kivu provinces are rich in minerals such as coltan, which is used to make components in smartphones and laptops. It is now a valuable commodity on the global market and many players have an interest in exploiting such minerals, legally or illegally, not least the Rwandan government of President Paul Kagame. Most recently, the principal opposition to the Congolese government in Kivu has come from the March 23 movement, usually referred to as M23, a Tutsi militia. M23 receives military and other support from the Rwandan government, which uses M23 illegally to exploit Kivu's mineral resources. M23 has become quite professional both militarily and as civil administrators in territory it has seized. M23 also is now part of a larger rebel coalition, the Congo River Alliance, AFC, that opposes the Congolese government in the eastern Congo. On the government side is the Congolese army, known as FARDC, the military of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The army is assisted by United Nations and Southern African Development Community peacekeepers. It is also supported by the FDLR, Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, an ethnic Hutu militia, whose members committed the 1994 Rwandan genocide, and other pro-government militias such as the Wazalendo, a pro-government rebel coalition. The current fighting in the Kivu region was initiated by M23 in 2022, when M23 launched a major military offensive which has been ongoing since then at varying levels of intensity and for which the Rwandan government has supplied weapons, ammunition, material and troops. Following a lengthy pause, the offensive was resumed in October 2024 and ramped up dramatically in January 2025, when M23 seized large amounts of territory in both Kivu provinces. In a major battle between the 23rd and the 30th of January, M23 captured Goma, the capital of North Kivu, forcing relocation of the provincial government to a temporary capital. The M23 offensive appears to have culminated at this point, notwithstanding that the M23 leadership expressed a desire to march on Kinshasa, the national capital. Since January, there has been a reduction in the fighting as M23 consolidates its territorial gains, institutes civil administrations in its new territories and intensifies its mining activities. Nevertheless, authorities say some 7,000 people have been killed in fighting since January. The DRC government blames Rwanda for the conflict in Kivu. Diplomatic relations between the Congo and Rwanda broke down on the 24th of January, leading the expulsion of Rwandan diplomats from Kinshasa and the recall of DRC diplomats from Rwanda. United Nations sources estimated that between 500 and 1,000 Rwandan troops assisted M23 in the Goma area. On the 27th of January, Congolese and Rwandan troops exchanged fire across their border near Goma. There are fears the Kivu conflict could spread into a wider regional war, given the presence of Rwandan and Burundi troops in the Kivu provinces. Somewhat surprisingly then, in March, Congolese President Félix Tshisekedi and his Rwandan counterpart Paul Kagame met in Doha and reaffirmed their commitment to an unconditional ceasefire. This seemingly led to peace talks between the DRC government and the M23 rebels mediated by Qatar. On the 23rd of April, after a week of talks that both sides described as frank and constructive, the DRC government and the M23 rebels agreed to halt the fighting in eastern Congo until the peace talks mediated by Qatar reached their conclusion. In a statement read on Congolese national television and posted on X by the M23 spokesperson Lawrence Kanyuka, they said, by mutual agreement, both parties reaffirm commitment to the immediate cessation of hostilities, a categorical rejection of any hate speech, intimidation, and call on all local communities to uphold these commitments. The now ongoing peace talks in Doha notwithstanding, local conflicts continue in eastern Congo, with further villages reported to have fallen to the M23 rebels in April and May. North Korea. A 5,000-ton warship key to North Korea's naval advancement has been left damaged following a serious accident during its launch ceremony attended by leader Kim Jong-un. The destroyer slid off the ramp and became stuck after the flat car failed to move alongside it, throwing off its balance and crushing parts of the ship's bottom, according to the Korean Central News Agency. The accident at the northeastern port of Chongjin was an embarrassing setback for Mr. Kim, who has emphasized naval advancement as key to his nuclear-armed military. North Korean state media didn't say whether the incident on the 21st of May, 2025 caused any injuries. However, South Korea's military said the stricken warship was lying sideways in the water. Mr. Kim blamed military officials, scientists and shipyard operators for what he described as a serious accident and criminal act caused by absolute carelessness, irresponsibility and unscientific empiricism. He said the accident tarnished the country's dignity and officials responsible would be dealt with at the plenary meeting of the Party Central Committee to be convened next month. The damaged vessel was likely in the same class as the country's first destroyer, unveiled on the 25th of April, 2025, which experts assessed as the North's largest and most advanced warship to date. While North Korea's naval forces are considered inferior to South Korea's, analysts still view the destroyer as a serious security threat, as it could enhance the country's offensive and defensive capabilities. North Korea's Kim Jong-un also says country will increase number of nuclear weapons. Kim Jong-un said North Korea is facing a grave threat from what it said was a US-led nuclear-based military bloc in the region. Tensions on the Korean peninsula have escalated in recent months as Mr. Kim accelerates the development of his nuclear and missile programs and supplies weapons and troops to support Russia's war in Ukraine. The US, South Korea, and their allies have expressed concern that Moscow could reciprocate by providing North Korea with advanced weapons technology, further enhancing the threat posed by its nuclear and missile program. Australia. There is increasingly an elephant in the room that no one, least of all the government, is discussing. That is the US logistic build-up in Australia. Now I am not seeing this as conspiracy, but nevertheless it has implications which I wonder if are understood by either side. The US is spending hundreds of millions of dollars upgrading northern Australian airbases to take B-1, B-2 and B-52 bombers. Recently US Marines from the Darwin rotation deployed to the Philippines to work with them on exercise. The exercise was not reported here. No Australian forces were involved. Slightly earlier, a group of B-2s flew across Australia from bases in the USA their way to Diego Garcia and were refueled by USAF KC-135s operating out of Amberley. What the operation was, whether training or operational, is not clear. There was no report in the Australian press. It is clear that large quantities of US equipment are already prepositioned at Darwin and Bandiana, and the two articles suggest that trend is going to accelerate. Undoubtedly our government sees this as a way to avoid our own increases in spending, but it surely has implications even to extent committing us to whatever policy the US has towards Taiwan. The US Department of Defense has also unlocked a more efficient pathway for deploying equipment to Australia, thanks to a new $37.5 million contract established by the US 413th Contracting Support Brigade, CSB, and the 8th Theatre Sustainment Command, TSC. This initiative directly addresses the complex agricultural cleaning requirements imposed by Australia's Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, DAF, a historically lengthy and costly process for the US, but one that ensures Australia's biosecurity. Previously, US military equipment destined for Australia often required months of pre-inspection and cleaning in the US or other Pacific nations. Recognizing the need for greater agility, particularly in preparation for large-scale exercises like Talisman Sabre 25, the 8th TSC and U.S. Army Pacific USAPAC sought a more flexible solution. The new contract leverages the expertise of local contractors with established logistics networks and specialized DAF cleaning capabilities. Crucially, it allows for equipment to be downloaded in Australia even without prior DAF inspection. While some quarantine and cleaning at Australian ports may still be necessary, this dramatically speeds up the deployment process and offers significant cost savings. This initiative directly addresses the complex agricultural cleaning requirements imposed by Australia's Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, DAF, a historically lengthy and costly process for the US, but one that ensures Australia's biosecurity.
This strategic update was produced by the RUSI New South Wales Special Interest Group on Strategy. The SIG Strategy Group seeks to enhance knowledge of strategy, including the evolution of strategic thought, maintain awareness of current geostrategic issues, and undertake research on nominated issues of current strategic interest.
Lancer Barracks 2, Smith Street, Parramatta, is home to the 1st 15th Royal New South Wales Lancers, an Army Reserve Light Armoured Reconnaissance Regiment equipped with the PMVL Hawkeye. The barracks also house the Lancers Museum and its collection of vintage armoured vehicles. Vehicles the regiment has been equipped with since 1940. Vehicles that are for the most part restored to operational status, able to display their prowess to the public on a monthly basis. The museum is managed and staffed by volunteers, mostly veterans. Public funding is limited to in-kind. The funds to maintain and display the collection comes from access fees, a bit of trading and generous public donations, mainly from the regimental alumni. Vehicles, however, have to be stored in the open, covered in tarpaulins to mitigate rain and tempest damage. The museum needs your help. The museum is building sheds to cover and provide unfettered access to the collection, like these in the South African War Museum Johannesburg. A financial stretch beyond the museum's accumulated surplus. You can help donate at lancers.au.